Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbeville. As much as she wanted to and even volunteered to, Hazel von Roeder's tours of duty during World War II in Korea never sent her overseas. But as any veteran will tell you, stateside service was just as essential to the war effort as any other service. Hazel's skills as an Army nurse took her to Fort Bliss's famed William Beaumont Army Hospital during World War II, and then to Kelly Air Force Base in San Antonio as an Air Force flight nurse with the 1734th match during the Korean conflict. Her story of service is indeed one of courage and dedication. Please welcome Air Force Captain Hazel von Roeder to Veterans of the Valley. Hazel, it's a pleasure to know you, and it's a pleasure to have you here. You were born and raised in Wellborn, Texas. What was Wellborn, Texas like back in the 1920s?
That's right. Oh, what was it like?
What was it like?
Well, at that time, I thought it was a pretty nice place.
Pretty small.
Well, it has been smaller, but now it's not even the same place anymore.
Right.
I hardly know anyone in there anymore. But when I was there was grocery stores, a barber shop, a saloon.
Right.
Just you name it, and I was almost there.
Your dad and your granddad owned a general merchandise store.
Yes, my grandfather and dad had a general merchandise. It was known as John H. Roeder and Son.
And your mom was home raising 4 boys and 2 girls, right?
That's right.
Right. You always wanted to be a nurse, you told me. You said you had a passion for this really from when you were a little girl, and one of your little brothers was even one of your patients, right?
Yes, he was. I said I stunted his growth because he's always so small. I would make a concoction of jawbreakers, you know what they are?
Yes, ma'am.
Water, salt, and pepper till they dissolved.
Right.
And I'd say, Norman, it's time to take your medicine. He would take it.
He'd do whatever Sister Hazel would tell him.
That's right. Whatever I told him to do, he did.
And survived it, right?
Yeah.
Right. Graduated from, you went to school in a one-room schoolhouse in Wellborn for 4 years, and then you came to College Station, where A&M Consolidated High School was actually located on campus, on the A&M campus, right?
That's correct.
Right, right. You wanted to be a nurse, so you did. 1941. Talk about Jeff Davis Hospital in Houston. You went there in September of 1941, and it's no longer there, but you learned a lot there, didn't you?
Oh, you better believe I did. It was a city-county hospital. And you just saw a little bit of everything.
Yes, ma'am.
Jeff Davis had only been in existence a very short time when I went there, so it was really a new hospital.
Right.
But it was well known for the care that they got.
Right.
It was not far from 5th Ward, which was not a very nice place in Houston.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. 3 months after you entered there for nursing training, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked. The United States was in World War II. And you told me that you knew then that you wanted to be in the military.
Yes, I was on duty at the time, and they called us to the nurses' quarters, which was right behind the hospital. And they told us that war had been declared, and I thought, well, I have some brothers, and the boys that I grew up or went to school with would all be going to the military. So I made up my mind that's what I wanted to do. In my senior year at Jeff Davis, they had what they called the Cadet Corps, which I think you got a few dollars from the government, and then you were obligated to go into the service after you graduated.
Right. You were a cadet nurse, is that
yes,
essentially?
my senior year.
And that was your senior year. So after you finished nursing school, you were in the Army. You went to Fort Sam Houston, as a lot of soldiers did for your basic, right?
Yes.
Right, right. And then off to El Paso, to Fort Bliss. That must have been a long way away from home. You must have wondered, where am I, right?
I had only been away from home to go to Jeff Davis in Houston.
Right.
And when I got on the train to go to El Paso, and we rode for I don't know how long, I thought, this is the end of the jumping off place. It was hot in the daytime, but it's always cool at night.
Right. What year would this have been? About 1943? 44?
No.
44?
See, I didn't graduate to 44. It was in 45.
It was in 1945. Okay. So it was towards the end of the war in Europe,
yes,
and the
in
end
fact,
of the war
I hadn't
in Japan.
been in service too long when the war was over.
When the war was over. That's right. You talked about one of the rules of all nurses was to not get involved and don't fall in love with the patient, and you broke that rule.
Well, along with several others. But you had to get permission from your chief nurse
Right.
before you could get married.
Mm-hmm.
And I will remember what she said to me. Hop to it.
Do it.
Yeah.
Hubert Forney,
Yes.
you married. Hubert had been a paratrooper in Europe, is that right? A young man from Perry, Oklahoma.
That's correct.
And he had been a paratrooper in Europe, and he had to come to Fort Bliss, for, I guess, because to cure wounds, I guess. And
Well, he wasn't wounded. He had some health problems,
Right.
so he was there and thought perhaps he would be going
Right, to Japan.
to Japan, which the war was over. So
Right, as so
so
many
instead of
soldiers
going
thought,
to Japan, he went back to Perry.
Right. You all married and you lived in Perry. Your in-laws had a dairy farm and a restaurant there,
Yes,
is that
that's
right?
correct. Known
Right.
as Dairy, Forney Dairy.
Right. Sadly, you were married 3 years, and Hubert died of bulbar polio,
Yes.
which a lot of people don't know about now, but back then it was quite prevalent.
It certainly was. It was nationwide.
You stayed in the reserves.
Yes.
Talk about what you did after that. You went to Baytown
Well,
for
see,
a while, right?
when I got out of the Army, you were not discharged from the service. You were separated from the service.
Right.
So I stayed in the reserve.
You stayed in the reserves. I want to talk about Fort Bliss some more, because I don't want to leave that, because I've learned a lot about the hospital there, the William Beaumont Hospital, which is now known as the William Beaumont Army Medical Center. And you were actually working in part of the annex of that, right?
Yes.
In Fort Bliss.
At Fort Bliss.
Right. This was a hospital that, according to my own research at the time of World War II, around that time, it had about 70 buildings or so. It was pretty a spread out area, but it was quite a facility, right?
Yeah. Yes, it was.
Yeah. Talk about what you did there, because this is a big part of your story, and the people that you cared for, and the nurses that you cared for that had been in Japan, and especially the ones that had come from Corregidor.
Well, we got, general nursing care, changed dressings, administered medications, and gave a lending ear to the ones that wanted to talk to you about what had happened to them.
Right.
And a lot of them did that.
Right, right, right. I know that the Beaumont Hospital was especially known for its plastic surgery
Yes.
at the time, so this was a very important part of it.
Yeah. I well remember at Fort Bliss, I had a patient with the name of Samuel Carpenter.
Yes,
He was really a tough cookie, if you want to call him that. He was from the Bronx.
Right.
And they were on bivouac, and he had a little too much to drink, and he got run over by a truck, so he was paralyzed from his waist down. He was determined he was going to walk. And there was a little, the nurse attendants we had were wax.
Right.
And he called this one Pee-wee. She was a little bitty one, but she'd get him up, and he'd try to walk, and he'd fall flat on the floor, and he'd use a lot of profanity, and then he'd get up, and he'd try again. You'd go off duty, and you'd think, well, he was not going to be here in the morning.
Right.
But you go back, and he was just what you call bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
Right.
And we had a ward officer, Dr. Zucker. He said, Carpenter's not going to die. He said, the Lord don't want him, and the devil's not ready for him.
Wonderful.
Do you know that a week before I was discharged, he got a pass to go to Juarez, Mexico. He walked with a cane.
Right.
He wanted me to go with him, and I said, no way.
Good choice.
He came back, you could tell he'd had a good time.
The nurses that you cared for at Fort Bliss, there's a lot of people that don't know the history of this, but there were nearly 70 nurses that were taken prisoner as a result of the fall of Bataan to the Japanese.
Yes.
And while these nurses were not specifically part of what's known as the Bataan Death March, they were still evacuated to Corregidor, and I believe later served in internment camps in Manila.
They did.
And before they came. But a lot of these nurses were treated rather barbarically and harshly, and these were the ones that you cared for. You saw a lot of suffering from these
Oh, yes.
ladies.
Yes. They were what you call basket cases. mentally disturbed.
Right.
They were on starvation diets. I don't know how, really, I don't know how they survived. I don't know
Right.
how any of those prisoners survived.
Right. Right. And they were ill because they were dealing with not only
That's right.
malaria.
And they had illness. If they were on a medication and they ran out of it, there was no replacement for it. They didn't have, the
Right.
drugs were not replaced, or the medications were not replaced.
Right. Right. You always wanted to go overseas, and we mentioned that from the outset.
Yeah.
You were ready to go overseas. You
Yeah.
wanted to go where the action was, and you volunteered, but your name never came up.
That's right.
Why do you think that?
I guess it was meant to be. I wasn't to go.
Right.
I don't know.
Right. Seemed like they had their quota every time
That's right.
before your name.
And a lot of my classmates that I had at Jeff Davis were in the service, and one of my roommates was in France,
Right.
Le Havre, France. And I would like to have gone, but I never had the opportunity.
Well, the service that you provided stateside was, like we said, certainly essential. You'd made the thought to me, you told me that at Jeff Davis, when you were there, that you thought you were prepared to go into the military and seen everything you could see, but you were wrong.
I was wrong.
Yeah, because of what you ended up
Yes.
seeing and experiencing.
And you know what was so ironic about the patients during or the servicemen during World War II, that they always said, "Take care of my buddy first."
Yes, ma'am.
That was not so during the Korean.
Right. Yeah. There was a difference in the soldier of World War
That's
II and the
right.
soldier of
That's
Korea.
right. Take care of my buddy first.
Right. Right. Let's go and jump forward. You changed services from the Army to what had then become the Air Force. No
Yes.
longer the Army Air Corps, but had
Yeah.
become the Air Force. Talk about your decision to do that, because you always wanted to be involved in flight and a flight nurse, right?
Well, you see, when I first went to Fort Sam, I thought that I was going to get to be a flight nurse then with the Air Corps,
Right.
but I was wrong.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, well, if I ever go back in, I want to be a flight nurse. So I did.
Right. I want to talk about your service at Kelly Air Force Base as a flight nurse. Talk a little bit about the unit you were with. Again, that was the 1734th MATS, which stands for Military Air Transport Service.
That's correct.
Right. So tell us what you did and what you served. You did a lot of flying.
Well, we could fly only 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
We had a flight that went from San Antonio up the East Coast, and our destination was Westover, Massachusetts.
Right.
And then we had one that went to the West Coast, was over to California, and then up to, I guess it was Washington. They went over to Belleville, Illinois, and then came back.
Right.
So we would be gone 2 or 3 days on a flight, and maybe be back home at base for a couple of days and then go out again.
Mm-hmm. And what would you do? Where did the flights land? Who did they pick up? And then what was your job once they did?
Well, of course, they always had their medical records with them, and I had to check that to see what kind of medications they were on, what they needed while they were in flight.
Mm-hmm. Now these were Korean War soldiers, Korean War
Yes,
people that were that had been casualties, that had been wounded.
that's right. And they were either on their way home, or either they were going to a hospital closer home.
Right, right, right. What were these airplanes like? I think we determined C-54s or some sort of carrier units, type
Right.
of converted conveyor type airplanes. We're going to see a picture of one here in a moment.
They had rows of litters, or stretchers, or litters as we called them, 2 or 3 high,
Right,
and those patients would be in there. And the ones that had to have bed rest were in the stretchers, and then we had the ones that were ambulatory that they, you know, they sat in a regular seat.
In regular seats.
Yeah.
That's right. And it was your job to keep them comfortable, to keep,
Right.
I guess there were IVs involved. There were just all different kinds of.
I don't recall giving any IVs while I was there. I gave injections.
Right.
And oral medication, changed dressings, and things like that.
Right. Right. While they were being
Yes.
transported.
Yes.
Did that get difficult after a while? I mean, because when you're flying around, there's turbulence. The planes are going back and
Well,
forth.
one time I landed up in the garbage pail. It was a big garbage barrel, I guess you'd say.
Right.
And I got up to go back in the tail of the plane to get a cup of coffee, and we hit an air pocket, and next thing I knew, I was like a jackknife sitting down in this barrel.
Right. Right. Did you fly a lot? I mean, you were on a few days and off a few days,
You could fly 18 months.
You could, yeah, for 18 months. But
Yeah.
when you got back, did you get to have a little R&R every time you got back, or were you right back
No,
on the plane again?
we would be back maybe a couple of days and then have to go out on another flight.
Right, right. And you talked about the people that you picked up and transported. These are people that both had physical issues and psychological issues and mental issues. So
Yes.
you really sort of ran the whole gamut of what you saw and what you cared for. Is that right?
That's right.
Right, right. You remarried, and you married a pilot, Mr. Von Roeder,
Right.
at the time, and he had been a pilot there at Kelly Air Force Base, right?
He had just come back from Okinawa.
I see. And you all were married, no longer married, but you have 3 children, 3 daughters. Is that right?
Right.
Talk about them, your daughters.
Well, Deanne, the oldest daughter, lives here in Bryan, and she's married to the chief of police, Elmer Snyder.
Right.
And she and her first husband had 2 children, Christopher and Courtney.
Right.
And after Deanne lost her husband, Joe, then she married Elmer Snyder, and he had lost his wife.
Yes, ma'am.
And he had a daughter. So Elmer and Deanne have raised the 3 children. They've done a wonderful job.
Right. Well, Elmer does a wonderful job here at Texas A&M as the chief of police.
Yeah,
of course, at Texas A&M, and
In
everybody knows Elmer.
In fact, he's too good. He never tells the children no.
Now, he heard you say that.
Yeah. My middle daughter, as you know, Jill, died when she was 18 of cancer. And my youngest daughter, Penny, is married to Reagan Richetsky, and she has 1 son, Preston,
Yes, ma'am.
and they live in Taylor.
Right.
She and her husband both work for the state of Texas.
I see. I see. And Deanne, your oldest daughter, works at Texas A&M, I believe, in the purchasing department,
with
right?
A&M System.
For the system, in the purchasing.
Director of Purchasing for
in
A&M
the purchasing
System.
department, right. So you have a lot of family just
Yeah.
right here in town, right. That's a wonderful fact. We've got some photographs that came off of your wall, and a couple of other photographs that I want to go to, and I want to talk about just a little bit some of the things that this is a photograph of you in the Army. About how old do you think you were at that time?
Well, let me see. I was born in 1921. That was in 45, so I was 24.
You were 24 years old.
Yeah.
Army photograph. And then we jump to the Air Force, and I guess this was taken sort of an official photograph at Kelly?
That was taken in 1950.
When you were a first lieutenant, and you, when you left active service, you were a captain.
That's right.
Those are your captain's bars. And tell us what else is in that
Well,
picture.
Lieutenant Von Roeder, I wanted our picture made together when I got my captain bars. And he was a first lieutenant.
Right.
And he said, only if you'll let me wear your bars. And I said, heck no. I earned those railroad tracks and I'm wearing them.
Those are my bars.
So needless to say, the picture was not made.
Right. And there's your wings on top.
My
and,
wings
yeah.
and discharge button, which is known as ruptured duck.
Right. That's right. And your dog tag. And, you had
And
all
my
that.
dog tags, that's true.
Right. We talked about the William Beaumont General Hospital. This is a photograph that I came up with at about that time. So this is somewhat familiar with what you recall during World War II, right?
Yes.
It's
That's correct.
it's changed quite a bit
Yes,
now.
it has.
Now this you supplied to us, and this is what we believe is a C-54, and this is the type of airplane that you flew out of Kelly as part of the 1734th. MAX
Actually,
unit, right?
that picture was made at Gunner Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were in flight school there, we all wore parachutes, but then when we flew with mats,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't wear one.
Right.
If
Right.
the plane went down, you went down with the patients.
I see. I see. I see. There's some great pictures there. When you were going to have Deanna, your oldest child, that was sort of when you knew your military career was going to be coming to an end, because the military was not quite as understanding of military women with children, right?
That's true. In the Army, if a female got married, you automatically got out.
Uh-huh. Right.
In the Air Force, you could be married, but you couldn't have a dependent under 16.
Right. Right.
So
So you left the service.
I left the service, but I stayed in the Air Force Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
And my daughter was 9 months old, and I kept getting this questionnaire to fill out, and I knew when I did, that'd be the end of my military career.
Right.
Because you couldn't have a child under 16.
I see.
So
in 1953 is when you got out.
That's right.
That's right. In 1953. So tell us what you've been doing, or what you did do for 57 years, I guess, starting in 1950, or 57 years total in nursing, but as a civilian nurse, sort of take us after Kelly and what you did.
Oh, after Kelly, let me see.
Yeah.
Well, in 1966,
Yes, ma'am.
we moved back to Bryan College Station permanently.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I worked in the doctor's offices. I worked in the hospital. I retired from the Texas Department of Health in 1991
Uh-huh.
due to my son-in-law's illness.
Right.
We surveyed nursing homes.
I see. And so, like I say, you work for private doctors. You work
Yes.
for in hospitals.
I worked for Dr. McGill.
Mm-hmm.
He's now deceased. I worked for Dr. Bobbitt, who's now relocated somewhere else.
This was all in Bryan College Station, right?
Yeah.
Right. And you, like I say, you stayed in nursing after, in some 57 years or so total that you were in nursing. Is that right?
Yeah. Somewhere about there.
Right. Describe your passion for nursing. I mean, that you've had since you just a small child. I mean, it's just, and I know that we talked about this, that you still have a passion for quality nursing.
I
and want to
do.
see it at every turn, right?
I do. I've always enjoyed taking care of other people. And I think I told you, when I go to the hospital and I see how the nursing is done now, it's all I can do to, I have to bite my tongue to keep from saying something.
Right.
Nursing is not what it used to be.
Right. But there are nurses out there that, that want to keep the profession.
That's right. But you know, nowadays you don't know who's a nurse, who's not a nurse.
Why do you say that?
They don't dress like nurses, and a lot of times their tags are turned upside down. You can't read their tag to see who they are.
Well, the nurses to be listening to this out there.
That's
You're getting
all right.
a good lesson from a lady who is passionate about the business. Since you retired from the Texas Department of Health, and you said that you one of the things that you did there was you surveyed nursing homes.
Yes.
Make sure that they were doing it right.
Oh, yes.
And that became a full-time job, I bet, because you
it
found
did.
it both ways, that they
That
were doing
it
it right
did.
and that they weren't.
That it did.
Right. And you retired from that in 1991, and you live here now. You said that about 7 years ago you were diagnosed with congestive heart failure, but as you tackled everything else in your life, you've tackled that. Talk about the regimen that you're on right now that you stick to.
Supposed to stick to.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, going from taking no medication except over-the-counter drug to 11 doses of medicine a day, low-fat, low-sodium diet,
Right,
and exercise 3 times a week.
Right.
I go to cardiac rehab 3 times a week.
right, right.
So that keeps me going.
That keeps you going. And how do you feel?
I feel good. It always makes you feel better to say you feel good than, oh, I don't feel so good.
Right, right, right.
But there's a lot of people at cardiac rehab that'll say, well, if that 88-year-old woman can do it, so can I. So I guess maybe I've been a little inspiration to some of them.
Right. You'll be 89 in September of 2010.
That's correct.
And you certainly don't look it.
Well,
You don't
thank
act it.
Well, thank you.
So you sum up your career in the military. Obviously, you've got to be pleased with what you were able to do, how you were able to contribute to the war effort during World War II in Korea, and your career in nursing. How would you sum it up?
I wouldn't take anything in the world for the time that I spent in the military.
Mm-hmm.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I'd be back today if I wasn't too old.
Yes, ma'am. If you get any young nurses ask you any tips, you'll be glad to give them to them, right?
Well, like I say, nursing has changed.
Nursing has changed a lot. Well, it's a fascinating story. It really is, and the stateside service of veterans, all veterans, and we've had several here on the show, is very essential, and I know that you believe that also. And thank you very much for being a part of this show, and especially thank you for your service.
Well, you're quite welcome.
It's a pleasure to meet you and to know you. Like we said from the outset, while Hazel von Roeder's wish to serve where the wars were being fought was never really realized, her lifelong passion to care for and heal the ill and the wounded was the answer to a prayer for many of those who did, and we salute her service. I'm Tom Turbeville. Be sure and join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.